I woke up with my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, the taste of sulfur thick in my throat. It wasn't just the silence of the house that terrified me. It was the whisper I had just heard from a dead man. I stared at the shadow by my bedroom door, paralyzed, knowing that if I didn't move in the next 10 seconds, I would never move again. I will never forget that night. It was the eve of my 61st birthday, and the house was so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. I had fallen asleep late, my mind replaying memories of past birthdays like an old film reel, hugs that no longer existed, and the voice of my husband Henry, who had left this world 5 years ago. Sometimes I swore I could still hear him, especially when the wind rattled the window panes or the grandfather clock in the dining room chimed midnight. But that night, it wasn't an echo. It was him. I saw him in my dream with a clarity that chilled my very soul. He was standing by the side of the bed, wearing the same clothes he had on the day he died. His blue work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, carrying that scent of sweet pipe tobacco that always clung to him. His face was serious, but his eyes held more sadness than fear. He spoke to me with a firm voice, not shouting, but with the authority of a command that allowed no refusal. "Martha, get out of the house before dawn." I tried to speak, to ask him why, but my voice was stuck in my throat. He leaned in a little closer, bringing his hand toward my face. I felt the phantom cold of his fingers, and a shiver violently shook my body. "Listen to me," he insisted. "Before the sun comes up, get out." I woke up with a gasp. My heart was pounding like a sledgehammer in my chest. The room was dim, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the blinds. The digital clock read 3:47 in the morning. The air smelled strange, like gas. Or maybe it was just my imagination running wild. I sat up in bed and saw something that stole the breath from my lungs. A shadow stood by the door, shaped exactly like a man. I blinked and it vanished. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming with my eyes open, that grief and solitude were finally playing tricks on my mind. But then I remembered Henry's words. Before dawn, internal monologue. They say intuition is just the soul processing what the eyes miss. I didn't want to believe I was in danger in my own sanctuary, the home Henry and I built brick by brick. But love isn't just about comfort. Sometimes love is a warning bell ringing in the dark. I put on my coat, grabbed my purse, and walked out. I didn't turn on a single light. I walked barefoot down the hallway, my nerves stretched tight as piano wire. When I opened the front door, the early morning wind cut through my skin like a knife. The entire neighborhood was asleep. The sky was a dark blanket without a moon, and only the distant crow of a rooster broke the silence. I sat on the garden bench, hugging my knees to my chest, just waiting for the sun to rise. But before we go any further, I have a special invitation for you. Please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It really helps me see your support and that you're enjoying these stories. And tell me in the comments below, what city are you watching from? Now let's continue. The cold was seeping into my bones. I wanted to go back inside several times. It felt ridiculous to be sitting out there, but something stopped me. It wasn't fear. It was instinct. It was almost 5:30 when the first gray light of dawn peeked over the rooftops. The sunrise stained the sky a faint orange, and just then, a sound shook the ground beneath me. A dry, loud, tearing explosion. The glass in the windows vibrated violently. I turned my head and saw my house engulfed in fire. Smoke was pouring out of the vents in the roof. The air instantly filled with the unbearable stench of gas and burning wood. I ran toward it, screaming my husband's name, even though I knew he wasn't there. The fire roared, devouring the place that had been my life for 30 years. Neighbors came running out, some with garden hoses, others frantically calling 911. I could only watch, paralyzed, while the flames reflected in my tears. A neighbor, Linda, grabbed my shoulders. "Martha, you're alive! Oh my God, you're alive!" I couldn't answer. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely stand. The fire crackled as if it had a voice, as if it were saying my name over and over again. And amidst the roar of the flames, I thought I heard a phrase, clear, precise, unmistakable. "I told you, Martha." I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. The voice came from inside the house, from right where our bedroom used to be. It was Henry's voice. The firefighters arrived minutes later, but the damage was done. The walls collapsed. The furniture burned like memories that couldn't be saved. Everything I had built with my husband was consumed right before my eyes. The heat was so intense I had to step back. One of the firefighters approached me, his face smudged with soot. "Ma'am, did you live here alone?" I nodded. "You were lucky to get out in time. If you had been inside..." His voice trailed off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Henry had saved my life. Again. When the fire was finally extinguished, the morning was fully upon us. The sun's rays illuminated the smoking remains, and for a moment amidst the ashes, I thought I saw a silhouette standing still, looking toward me. It was him. Henry, in that same blue shirt, with that same sad look. He smiled faintly, then vanished into the smoke. I fell to my knees in the dirt, trembling. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just felt a deep, hollow pit in my stomach, as if the last few years of my life had been ripped away in a single stroke. And as the firefighters worked, a thought began to grow in my mind like a poisonous weed. This hadn't been an accident. The fire had started in the kitchen, but gas valves don't just open themselves. I had checked everything before bed, but then I remembered something else. The afternoon before, my son David had stopped by the house with his wife Jessica, just to say hello. They had been in the kitchen. David said he wanted to fix a loose knob on the oven. Jessica, meanwhile, had chattered away with that fake smile that always made my blood run cold. The fire hadn't just taken my house. It had opened my eyes. That morning, while the neighbors whispered and the fire marshal wrote his report, I looked at the smoke rising to the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Henry, for warning me, for not letting me die amidst lies." What I didn't know yet was that the fire wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a much darker truth, a truth that would forever change the way I saw my own son. The smell of smoke didn't leave my hands for days. I could wash them over and over, but the perfume of disaster was still there, impregnated in my skin, in my memory, in every corner of my mind. I had lost the home where my children grew up, where I slept next to the love of my life, where every wall told a story. But what hurt the most wasn't the material loss. It was the silent certainty that someone had wanted me dead. That morning, the fire crew allowed me to get closer to the wreckage. I wore a handkerchief over my mouth to avoid inhaling the dust, but the air still burned my throat. The team chief, a robust man with a grave voice, explained that the fire had started in the kitchen. "A gas leak, Mrs. Robinson," he said, not looking me in the eye. "Likely the oven valve was left open." I nodded, although inside me something screamed, "That isn't possible." I was meticulous, obsessive even. Since Henry died, I checked the gas 3 times before sleeping. Sometimes I even took a photo on my phone just to have peace of mind. I had done it that night, too. I remembered perfectly closing the valve, feeling the click under my fingers. Something didn't fit. Among the rubble, I recognized the blackened remains of the dining room. There, amidst the shadows, a piece of glass caught the light. It was a photo frame, half melted by the heat. I picked it up carefully. Inside, still visible, was the picture. Henry, our son David, and his wife Jessica, smiling at a family reunion 3 years ago. Behind them, on the table, was a white envelope, one I remembered all too well. It was the envelope where Henry had kept his original last will and testament. I stood there staring at that photo for long minutes. The fire hadn't consumed it entirely, as if fate insisted I find it. In that moment, a thought pierced me like a knife. They knew. David had been the last one to touch the oven. Jessica, meanwhile, had been going through my drawers with the excuse of helping me clean. The night of the fire, neither of them called to see how I was. I had to be the one to contact them the next day. When they finally arrived at the scene, they did so with a coldness that froze my blood. David hugged me briefly, without tears, without emotion. Jessica, on the other hand, feigned horror with the theatricality of a cheap soap opera actress. "Oh, Mom, what a tragedy," she cried, pressing a hand to her chest. "Thank God you got out in time." I just looked at her. In her eyes, there was no fear, only relief. During lunch at my neighbor Linda's house, who had offered me temporary shelter, David tried to convince me of something. "Mom, you have to come stay with us. You can't be alone." "With you?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Yes, of course. Jessica and I will take care of you until everything is sorted out." Until everything is sorted out. That phrase made me smile bitterly. I knew perfectly well that what he wanted was to keep me close, to control what remained. It wasn't the first time he'd tried to meddle in my affairs since his father died. Years ago, Henry had left clear instructions. The house and the land would remain in my name until the day I died, at which point they would be divided among the children. But a few months ago, David had insisted on helping me with the paperwork. He said he wanted to make things easier for me, to keep everything organized. Now I understood what that meant. I agreed to go with them, though inside I was boiling, not out of hatred, but out of a dangerous curiosity. I needed to know what else they were hiding. Internal monologue. It's a strange thing, realizing you are a guest in the lion's den, especially when the lion is your own flesh and blood. I felt like a spy in my own life, trading the warmth of a mother's trust for the cold calculation of a survivor. The first day at their house, everything seemed normal, too normal. Jessica smiled at every turn, made me coffee, showed me the room where I'd sleep. "We made some arrangements, Mom, so you feel right at home." "Thank you," I replied, containing the tremor in my voice. At night, however, something kept me awake. I heard whispers in the hallway, footsteps stopping right in front of my door. Sometimes I thought I heard the sound of the doorknob turning slowly, as if someone were testing to see if it was locked. One early morning, I opened my eyes and saw a shadow pass beneath the door gap. Jessica. I recognized her by her perfume. I pretended to be asleep. I heard her open my purse and rifle through my things. When she left, I got up slowly. The drawer of the bedside table was slightly open. The spare set of keys to my property was missing. That morning, while we were having oatmeal, I asked Jessica, "Have you seen my keys?" "Your keys?" No idea," she said, not missing a beat. "Funny, I had them in my purse last night." "Maybe you lost them in the fire, Mom. With so much smoke and confusion," she smiled. That smile was the confirmation I needed. I didn't say anything else. I had to move carefully. I knew if I showed my suspicions too soon, they would isolate me. And this time, I wouldn't have Henry to warn me. That day, while David was at work, I decided to check his study. It was a small room, full of binders and documents. Among them, I found an envelope with the logo of North Bank. Inside, a loan contract in his name. And at the bottom, my forged signature. The loan had been taken out 3 weeks before the fire. The amount was exactly equal to the estimated value of my house. I felt a vertigo so strong I had to sit down. My hands were shaking. David hadn't just tried to rob me. He had mortgaged my house as if it no longer existed. I hid the document in my purse. That night, when he came back, I pretended everything was fine. He asked me to tell him again how the fire had happened, with a strange insistence. "Are you sure you didn't leave the gas on, Mom?" he said, looking down. "Positive, son," I replied. "You know how careful I am." "Yeah, sure," he muttered. Inside, I was burning with pain. I couldn't understand when my son had become a stranger. I remembered when, as a boy, he brought me flowers from the garden, when he cried if I got sick. Where was that child? When did I lose him? That night, I prayed for the first time in months. I didn't ask for revenge. I asked for clarity, and just before falling asleep, I felt it again. The same smell of pipe tobacco, the same low murmur of Henry right by my ear. "They aren't finished with you yet." I woke up sweating, and in that instant, I knew the fire had only been the first attempt. When I agreed to stay at my son's house, I did it for one reason only. I needed to see them act up close. It wasn't love or fear, it was strategy. By that point, the pain had stopped hurting and had turned into a cold lucidity. A woman who has survived fire learns to read the embers before they ignite. Jessica seemed delighted to have me there. The first day she made me breakfast, walked me to the pharmacy, and even bought me a new blanket. "So you sleep warm, Mom," she told me with that smile that never reached her eyes. Her kindness was a perfect mask, and behind it hid something she could no longer hide: impatience. David, on the other hand, avoided staying home for long. He greeted me with mechanical affection, like someone fulfilling a duty. Sometimes I saw him leave at dawn with his phone in hand and come back smelling of alcohol and someone else's perfume. I pretended to sleep, but my ears, accustomed to long silences, heard everything. One afternoon, while Jessica was cooking, the doorbell rang. She dried her hands quickly and peeked out the window before opening. "Who is it?" I asked. "David's accountant," she replied nervously. "He's just dropping off some work papers." The man entered without looking at me. He carried a leather briefcase and a hurried expression. He left an envelope on the table, exchanged a few words with Jessica, and left. But what caught my attention was that she ran to hide the envelope in her purse. That very night, when everyone was asleep, I got up in silence. Her purse was on a chair by the door. I opened it carefully. Inside, besides makeup and keys, I found the accountant's envelope, and inside that, a copy of Henry's falsified will. I couldn't contain the trembling in my hands. The document had my name, but the signature wasn't mine. The handwriting was clumsy, insecure, almost childish. It stated that the house and the land would pass directly to David upon my accidental or natural death. Accidental. That word seared into my skin like a burn. I put the envelope back where I found it. And that night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, Jessica entered my room without knocking. "Mom, did you sleep well?" she asked in her sickly sweet tone. "Yes, dear, like an angel." "Oh, I'm glad. Because last night I heard noises in the hallway. I thought you had gotten up." "Must have been the wind," I lied. Her eyes scanned me like a cat watching its prey. "You need to be careful, Mom. A fall at your age can be fatal." She smiled, turning around, and for an instant I swear I saw the shadow of evil in her expression. Internal monologue. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing the people you are supposed to trust are betting on your expiration date. It makes you realize that family isn't just blood. Sometimes it's the blood spilled. David, meanwhile, seemed increasingly distant. When I tried to talk to him about his father, he changed the subject. When I asked about his work, he answered evasively. One night, coming back late, I heard him arguing with Jessica in the kitchen. "I told you it wasn't the time," he muttered. "And when will it be, David?" she shot back. "We can't keep waiting." "Lower your voice, for God's sake. She might hear you." "So what? If she can barely climb the stairs, she won't last long." My soul shriveled. They were my own children planning my end. And yet, instead of fear, I felt a strange calm. One that only someone who has nothing left to lose can feel. The next day, I faked a fainting spell. I collapsed in the hallway while Jessica was on the phone. Her reaction was instantaneous. She ran toward me, but not to help. "David, come quick!" she yelled. He came running down, pale. Mom, can you hear me?" I opened my eyes slowly. "It was just a dizzy spell, son. Don't worry." The family doctor came to check me. "Nothing serious," he said. "Stress, probably." But the effect was exactly what I wanted. Jessica and David lowered their guard. They began to speak with less caution, believing I was weak, and that was how I learned what they were really plotting. One night, I heard the phrase that froze my blood. Jessica, in a low voice, said, "If we do it with gas again, no one will suspect." David replied, "No, we can't repeat that. This time it has to look like a fall." I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. They had tried to kill me once, and they were planning to do it again. The next morning, I acted with my usual naturalness. I smiled, cooked, and even thanked them for taking care of me. Jessica hugged me with feigned tenderness. "So lucky to have you here, Mom." "Yes," I replied serenely, "and so lucky for me to be alive." She laughed, not understanding. But that same afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Mr. Henderson, the attorney who had worked with my husband on drafting his will. "Mrs. Robinson," he said in a low voice, looking around, "I need to speak with you in private." Jessica approached immediately. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Just some old paperwork matters," I replied. "Don't worry." We went to the garden. Mr. Henderson pulled an envelope from his briefcase. "This is your husband's original will." "How did you get it? I thought it was lost in the fire." "I had it stored at the office. Your son came 2 months ago with another document, but something smelled wrong." I looked him in the eye. "What did that other document say?" "That you had renounced all your assets of your own free will." I had to close my eyes to keep from crying. Henry had warned me from the other side, and now I understood why. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to erase my name. That night, I hid the original will under my mattress. I slept little, but not with fear. For the first time in weeks, I slept with a purpose. I knew the battle was just beginning, and this time I didn't plan to run. Before closing my eyes, I smelled Henry's tobacco again. "Easy, Martha." I heard his voice clear and close. "You aren't alone anymore." I smiled in the darkness because I knew it. The fire that once almost killed me was now burning inside me, and it wouldn't go out until the truth came to light. There is no silence heavier than that of a house where everyone is lying. During the day, voices fill the hallways, laughter sounds forced, silverware clinks on the table. But at night, when the lights go out and the air becomes dense, the truth walks barefoot. I no longer slept deeply. My body rested, but my ears remained attentive. I knew how to distinguish every noise: the creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the curtains moving, the hum of the refrigerator. And among all those sounds, one began to repeat every morning: footsteps by my door. They were slow, careful, as if someone was avoiding making noise. Sometimes they stopped in front of my room for minutes, and I could hear the visitor's held breath. I knew who it was: Jessica. I didn't confront her. On the contrary, every night I pretended to sleep, leaving my purse within reach of her curiosity. I knew she couldn't resist the temptation to go through my things. A guilty mind always needs to check if it has left any loose ends. During breakfast, her performance was impeccable. "Mom, I made you oatmeal with cinnamon, just how you like it." "Thank you, dear," I would reply with a kind voice while watching her move. Every gesture was a piece of theater. Sometimes I wondered if even her affection for David was part of the script. He, for his part, was increasingly absent. He slept poorly, drank more, argued with Jessica in secret. And when he tried to talk to me, his voice would crack mid-sentence, as if a part of him still felt shame. One night, while we were having dinner, Jessica mentioned something that made me look down to hide the tremor in my hands. "David, honey, did you talk to the insurance lawyer yet?" she said, pouring him wine. "Not now, Jessica," he replied, irritated. "Are you sure? Because that money can't wait." She glared at him, implying I shouldn't know. I passed the days in silence, observing every word, every gesture, every lie. Until one afternoon, while they went out to run errands, I went into their room. The door was ajar. On the dresser sat a frame with our family photo: Henry, David, my younger daughter Clara, and me, smiling. But behind the frame, carefully hidden, was a blue folder. I opened it. Inside were copies of notarized documents, payment receipts, and among them, a falsified medical report. Martha Robinson, advanced heart failure. The date was recent: my name, my age, my address. But I had never taken that exam. I froze. This was part of the plan, to make people believe my death would be natural. I put the document away, closed the folder, and returned it to its place. I couldn't act yet. I still lacked proof and strength. That night, as I turned off the lamp, I felt a familiar smell: tobacco. The same aroma Henry always left when he sat next to me on sleepless nights. "Don't cry, Marty," his voice whispered, so real it made my skin prickle. Fear doesn't belong to you anymore. I closed my eyes, letting the tears run silently. I knew that somehow he was still accompanying me. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk. I hadn't breathed fresh air in weeks. While walking through the neighborhood park, I ran into Linda, my neighbor of a lifetime. Seeing me, she hugged me tight. "Martha, you don't know how much I prayed for you. That fire was the devil's work." "Really?" I replied, looking at the ground. "The devil? He has a last name." She looked at me with surprise. I asked her not to ask questions, but to help me with something. I handed her the envelope with the original will to keep at her house without telling anyone. "Please, Linda," I begged. "If something happens to me, take it directly to Mr. Henderson." Her eyes welled up. "Are they threatening you?" "Not yet," I said, "but they will." When I returned to the house, Jessica was waiting for me in the living room. "Where were you, Mom?" "Just walking a bit, needed air." "You should have let us know. We worry." "Really?" I asked, smiling. "I didn't think anyone here worried about me." Her smile vanished. In her eyes, I saw a flash of irritation. Just a second, but enough to confirm she knew something was shifting. At night, I faked chest pain. I moaned just enough to wake David. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, alarmed. "Nothing, son. Just a little pressure." Jessica ran to get a glass of water while I watched her face. There was no fear in her, just contained anxiety. "We should take her to the hospital," David said. "No need," I replied serenely. "I'm fine." And then, watching them argue, I understood their alliance was beginning to crack. The weight of guilt was separating them, and I was going to use it. The next day, I showed up at Mr. Henderson's office unannounced. I carried the falsified document I had found. When he compared it with the original, he shook his head. "This is a serious felony, Martha. Do you want to proceed legally?" "Not yet," I replied. "Why wait?" "Because I want to see how far they are capable of going." Mr. Henderson looked at me with respect and perhaps a bit of fear. He knew that behind my quiet voice, something bigger was brewing. That night, Jessica came around my door again. But this time, when she turned the knob, I was already awake. I waited for her to enter. She approached my purse and opened it clumsily. Then I turned on the lamp. "Looking for something, Jessica?" She jumped. Her face went pale. "Oh, Mom, you scared me. I just came to see if you needed anything." "At 2 a.m? How attentive." We looked at each other in silence. The air was thick, almost unbreathable. I didn't blink. Neither did she. During that eternal minute, she understood that I already knew everything. "You should sleep, Jessica," I told her finally in a low voice. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "Why do you say that?" I have a feeling." She turned around and left without saying more. I locked the door, leaned my back against it, and took a deep breath. The fear had disappeared. In its place, a strange calm had been born, a calm that only precedes the storm. And while the dawn painted the sky gray, I promised myself that soon it would all end. I would no longer be the woman running from the fire. I would be the one lighting it. They say silence is the language of the wise. I learned it is also the weapon of survivors. After so much time living surrounded by lies, I understood that sometimes the best way to attack is to pretend you are already defeated. I began my performance on an ordinary morning. During breakfast, I let the coffee cup drop. The hot liquid burned my hand, but I made no gesture of pain. Jessica ran toward me, feigning concern. "Mom, what's wrong?" "I don't know, dear. Lately, everything falls from my hands." David looked at me with a furrowed brow. Worried? But not so much for my health as for the possibility that his plan was getting complicated. I lowered my head. I took a deep breath and coughed dramatically. It was the start of my little theater. Over the following days, I started faking symptoms: dizziness, weakness, lack of appetite. Jessica accompanied me at every step, smiling, helpful, and increasingly confident. She gave me my medications, white pills that I kept under my tongue and then flushed down the toilet. I didn't know what they were, but I didn't need to check to understand they weren't vitamins. David began to be absent more frequently. He told me he had work, but I saw him arrive at dawn, his face tense. Guilt was devouring him, and I just had to wait. That wait was my best ally. While they believed my mind was clouding, I was gathering evidence. I recorded their conversations with a small device hidden in my robe. I kept copies of the falsified documents. And when I had everything, I wrote a letter in my own handwriting, addressed to Mr. Henderson. If something happened to me, he would know exactly what to do. But before we continue, tell me in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. One afternoon, while Jessica was talking on the phone in the garden, I heard her from the window. Yes, everything is going well. She won't last long. The doctor says her heart is weak. Pause. No, she doesn't suspect anything. Trust me, when they least expect it, we'll be free. Free. That word churned my soul. Free from whom? From me? From the woman who gave them a roof, food, love, and their father's legacy? I couldn't comprehend when love had transformed into greed. That night, I decided the time had come. I prepared the house with care. On the dining table, I placed Henry's portrait with a lit candle in front of it. I played soft music, the same we listened to on our anniversaries. Jessica was puzzled. What's going on, Mom? Nothing, dear. Just want to thank you both for taking care of me. David sat across from me, nervous. Jessica smiled. Thank us. No need, Mom. I poured wine into 3 glasses. I took a sip, slowly. I want to make a toast, I said. To family. David raised his glass with a trembling hand. Jessica imitated me. We drank. For a few minutes, silence reigned, until I pulled a small remote control from my pocket. David looked at me confused. What is that, Mom? A souvenir. I pressed the button and the TV turned on. A recording appeared on the screen. The voices were unmistakable. Theirs. If we do it with gas again, no one will suspect. No. Better it looks like a fall. The color drained from my son's face. Jessica stood up abruptly. What is this? That's a lie. A lie? I asked, with a calm I didn't recognize in myself. Listen to the end. The recording continued. Sooner or later, the old hag will fall and everything will be ours. Jessica screamed that I was crazy, that it was all a montage. David, speechless, buried his face in his hands. Mom, it wasn't like that. I didn't mean it. But you said it, I replied without raising my voice. And that's enough. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. At dawn, I heard Henry whisper my name in the wind. You did it, Martha. You did it. When I woke up, David had disappeared. Jessica, eyes red, looked at me with silent hatred. You don't know what you've just caused, old lady. Yes, I do, I replied. Justice. I called Mr. Henderson. I told him everything. And at noon, the police knocked on the door. Jessica was arrested for attempted homicide, forgery, and fraud. David turned himself in 2 days later, unable to bear the weight of the guilt. When the house was empty, I walked to Henry's portrait. Forgive me for taking so long, love, I whispered, but I needed to do it my way. The fire almost killed me, but the silence, that would have buried me alive. Sometimes you don't need to shout to get justice. You just have to keep silent long enough for the guilty to speak for themselves. And so they did. Internal monologue. It's a strange thing, victory. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like exhaustion. But beneath the exhaustion was something else. Clean air. For the first time in months, I wasn't breathing smoke. The day dawned with a clear sky, without a single cloud. It was strange, because for weeks the weather had been gray, as if the entire city reflected my grief. But that morning, the sun came through the window and landed directly on Henry's portrait on the dining table. I stood watching it for a long while. His smile seemed more alive than ever, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like he was back. Not physically, of course, but his presence filled every corner of the house. The smell of tobacco, the slight creak of the wood, the sensation of silent company. It was as if he walked with me in every step of my plan, giving me the strength I lacked. That afternoon, I set the table for a dinner. It wasn't just any dinner. It was the last one I would share with David and Jessica. I lit the candles, placed the antique porcelain plates, the ones Henry and I used only on special occasions, and adorned the center with white flowers, my husband's favorites. Jessica arrived first, with her strong perfume and fake smile. "What's going on now, Mom? Some celebration?" "A family dinner," I replied calmly. "It's been a while since the three of us ate together." "What a detail," she said, though her eyes shone with mistrust. David arrived minutes later, thinner, face tired. He hugged me weakly. "Mom, I don't know if this is a good idea." "Yes, it is," I assured him. "Today we need to talk, all of us." While I served the food, I felt a peace that was strange to me. It was the type of serenity that only arrives when one no longer has fear. Henry had taught me that dignity is not negotiated, not even with children. "Looks like an anniversary dinner," said Jessica, laughing mockingly. "In a way, it is," I replied. "Today marks 1 year since Henry died." Silence fell on the table like a stone. David put down his silverware. "Mom, I didn't know." "Of course not," I said. "You never remember important dates." We ate in silence for a few minutes. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jessica played with her wine glass. David watched her, uneasy, not knowing what to expect. Then I spoke. "I've thought a lot about the fire." Both of them tensed up. "It was an accident, Mom," David said quickly. "Yes, that's what everyone said. But there's something that doesn't fit," I continued. "I checked the gas that night. I turned it off with my own hands." Jessica laughed nervously. "And what are you insinuating, Mom? That someone wanted to kill you?" I looked her in the eyes. "I'm not insinuating, Jessica. I know." The silence that followed was interminable. David watched me, face slack. Jessica tried to dissimulate, but her gaze betrayed her. "You have no proof," she said, gritting her teeth. "On the contrary," I replied, "I have it all." And I pulled a folder from the drawer. Inside were the recordings, the copies of the falsified loan, the photos, and Henry's original will. David paled. Jessica sat immobile, glass halfway to her mouth. "It can't be," he whispered. "It is. And everything is in the hands of the attorney and the police," I said, voice calm. "But I didn't call you to take revenge." "Then why?" asked David, desperate. "Because I want you to look me in the eye while I tell you what you did." I stood up slowly and took Henry's portrait. "Do you remember this man?" I asked. "The one who gave you everything." David lowered his head. Jessica remained mute, hands trembling. "He trusted you," I continued. "And you, instead of honoring his memory, tried to destroy the little that was left of me." David started to cry. Jessica tried to stand up, but her legs shook. "I don't understand," she murmured. "How did you find out?" "He told me," I replied. Both looked at me confused. "Who?" asked David. "Henry." "Dad is dead!" Jessica screamed beside herself. "Oh, really? Then explain to me how I knew I had to get out of the house that night." The wind blew with force, and one of the candles blew out. The air turned freezing. Jessica covered her arms. David looked around, scared. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Nothing, son. Just closing a circle." In that moment, the dining room door opened by itself. A blast of cold air crossed the room, making the candle flames flicker. No one spoke. Jessica put a hand to her chest. David stood up. "Must be the wind," he stammered. I smiled. "Yes, the wind. Oh, Henry." I looked at the portrait, and for a second I swear I saw his smile move, barely perceptible. The shadow of his silhouette seemed to reflect on the wall. "Dad," whispered David, voice breaking. "Yes, son," I said. "Listen closely." Because the wind, that wind that seemed to roar from the past, brought a sound that wasn't a simple draft. It was a sigh, a name. "David." Jessica broke down crying. David fell to his knees. I remained standing, firm, serene. I don't want to see you in prison, I said, but I do want you to live knowing what you did. David looked up, tears in his eyes. Mom, I don't speak. There are no words that clean an intention. The clock struck 9. I blew out the candles one by one. This dinner is over. And now, what are you going to do? Asked Jessica, trembling. Nothing. The rest will take care of itself. The next day, the police arrived for them. Not because I reported them, but because Mr. Henderson had already handed everything over. My task was concluded. That night, I sat alone in the dining room. The wind continued entering through the cracks. The smell of tobacco floated in the air. And suddenly, I felt it again. That warm presence behind me. Thank you, Henry, I whispered, for warning me and for coming back. The frame of the portrait fell to the floor without anyone touching it, but the glass didn't break. I took it in my hands and saw that Henry's smile seemed clearer than ever. I closed my eyes and felt a soft breeze run over my face, and then I knew I wasn't alone. I never was. Silence has its own sound. I hadn't noticed it until then. It's a slow echo that slips between the empty spaces, a murmur that caresses what is no longer there. After everything that happened, after the truth, the tears, the screams, and the judgments, only that remained. Silence. A different silence, without fear, without lies. A clean silence. The house where I lived now was small, with light walls and windows that faced the garden. Sometimes it was hard to get used to so much free space, to not hearing furtive steps or voices whispering behind my back. But little by little, I began to love that calm. Every sunrise was a promise. I could breathe without feeling like someone was waiting for my last breath. Still, there was something pending, an inner voice asking me to close the circle, not with words, but with a gesture. So one morning, after much thought, I decided to return to the place where it all began. My old house, or rather, its ruins. Upon arrival, the air smelled of old smoke and wet earth. The rain of the last few days had washed away part of the soot, but the black tracks of the fire were still visible on the crumbled walls. The gate was rusted. When I pushed it, it creaked with a long lament, as if the house itself recognized my presence. I took a few slow steps, looking around. The garden that was once full of roses was now rough terrain covered in weeds. The windows didn't exist. The floor, blackened, was full of glass shards, broken ceramic, and pieces of my life. Every little piece told a story. I stopped in front of where the kitchen used to be. I remembered Henry sitting at the table, reading the newspaper while I made coffee. "Marty, do you know what I like most about coffee?" he used to say. "What?" I'd reply. "That it smells like home." I smiled, though tears burned my eyes. There was no coffee this time, only the sour smell of the past. I advanced toward the hallway. The walls, or what was left of them, were covered in ash. A door frame still stood, like a lonely arch resisting oblivion. The wind blew softly, lifting the dust in little swirls, and that was when something caught my attention, a glint among the debris. I crouched down with effort. My body ached, but my soul pushed me. I moved the pieces of wood aside, one by one, until my fingers touched something cold, metallic. It was a ring. My heart stopped for an instant. I picked it up carefully, and seeing it, a sob escaped me uncontrollably. It was Henry's wedding band, the same one he wore the day of our wedding, with the tiny inscription inside, M&H, 1978. I stood staring at it, unable to contain the tears. It had survived the fire, time, oblivion. It was as if Henry were telling me that, despite everything, love can also resist flames. While holding it between my fingers, I remembered the day he put it on me for the first time. It was a warm December afternoon. We were young, naive, happy. Henry was shaking more than I was. "I don't know if I deserve this much," he told me, "but I promised to learn how." I laughed and replied, "Love isn't deserved, Henry. It's cared for." Years later, amidst everything we lived through, that phrase returned to my mind over and over. And now, standing among the ruins, I understood that we had fulfilled it. We had cared for each other even after death. I kept walking among the remains, searching, without knowing exactly for what. Something inside me told me there was still a hidden truth, and I found it. Under a fallen beam, almost buried, was a small metal box. I pulled it out with trembling hands. It was blackened, dented, but locked. I opened it. Inside were several envelopes and a letter. The top envelope had my name, Martha. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Henry's, the same that had filled so many messages and little notes stuck to the mirror, the same that wrote to me when we argued. "I'll wait for you on the terrace. I won't sleep without your forgiveness." The paper was yellowed, but the words were still there, intact. "Martha, if you are reading this, it is because life took you further than we imagined. Don't be afraid. Fear doesn't belong to you. Courage does. If fire ever touches your life, remember that fire purifies. It doesn't destroy. Don't let anyone steal your faith, not even those you love, because true love doesn't hurt. It teaches. I will be with you where the wind stops and silence embraces you. Your strength will be my peace." My tears fell on the sheet, blurry but sincere. I spoke to him in a low voice, with an open soul. "Oh, Henry, even in your death you keep guiding me." Under that letter was a smaller one, wrapped with a red ribbon. Inside, an old key and a short note, almost a written whisper. "For when it all ends, you deserve to start over." I didn't understand. I put it in my coat pocket, along with the ring. I knew at some moment I would discover its purpose. That afternoon, Mr. Henderson called me. His voice sounded different, as if he too were keeping a secret. "Martha, there is something I didn't tell you before." "What is it?" "Henry left an account in his name." "An account?" "Yes, in it there are funds and documents he asked me to safeguard. He said I should deliver them to you only if you arrived alive at this point." "And how did he know that—" "I don't know, Mrs. Robinson, but he asked me for an exact phrase. Tell her that the fire wasn't an ending, but a beginning." I felt my heart shrink. The key, that key was for that box. Henry had thought of everything, even the possibility that I would have to be reborn from the ashes. That night, I went back to the ruins for the last time. I carried the ring, the key, and the letters with me. The sky was clear, and the moon illuminated the terrain like a silver lamp. I sat on the fallen wall of what was once our bedroom. The air was cold, but it didn't hurt. It smelled of earth, ash, and tobacco, the unmistakable aroma. "Is that you, Henry?" I whispered. There was no answer, but the wind moved suddenly, soft, enveloping, like a caress on my hair. I closed my eyes and felt him so close my soul trembled. "You are free now, Martha." The voice didn't sound outside. It sounded inside. Inside my chest. Inside my memory. Inside everything I once was. I opened my eyes. The sky was dawning. The horizon burned in pink tones. And for an instant, the fire of the past transformed into pure light. Then I understood. Henry never asked me to run from the fire. He asked me to look for the sunrise. I stayed there until the sun was high. Every ray was a blessing, a new breath for the soul. When I finally stood up, I looked back one last time. The ruins no longer seemed like a tomb to me. They were a testimony. What burns doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it is reborn different. I walked slowly back down the dirt path. The birds sang, and the air smelled of promise. In my pocket, the key seemed to vibrate as if it had its own pulse. I knew I still had one step left to take, opening that new door. That afternoon, I went to the bank. I handed over the key, the number Mr. Henderson had given me, and waited. The manager returned with a small safety deposit box. Inside was a folder, a deed, and a final note. "Martha, this land facing the sea belongs to you. It is our refuge. Go there when the noise of life tires you. There begins your freedom." I couldn't contain the weeping. Henry had planned it all, not as an escape, but as a second chance. That night, back home, I lit a candle next to Henry's portrait. The fire danced, reflecting his smile in the glass. I spoke to him softly. "Thank you for not letting me die. for teaching me that even fire can have a soul. I blew out the candle with a sigh. The darkness didn't scare me anymore, because inside me the light was still on, and while the wind entered through the window bringing the smell of tobacco and sea salt, I felt Henry walking beside me, silent, satisfied. The fire separated us, my love, but the truth brought us back together. Sometimes life takes everything away, so you learn to look at what is essential. I understood it when I saw myself in front of the sea, with empty hands and a soul finally at peace. Months had passed since that night when the truth came to light. Months in which I learned to breathe without fear, to sleep without locking doors, to speak without trembling. I lived in the small house Henry had left for me, on that land facing the ocean I never knew existed. A little white cottage, simple, with large windows and the smell of new wood. From my room, I could hear the waves breaking against the rocks and the song of the seagulls at dawn. The sea became my companion, and the wind, the messenger of everything that isn't said, but is felt. Every day started the same. I got up early, lit a candle in front of Henry's portrait, and opened the windows to let the breeze in. I was no longer scared by the smell of smoke or the sound of doors moving with the air. Now I knew they weren't signs of death, but reminders of life. It was him, greeting me in his way. At first, the solitude hurt. I was used to serving, caring, living for others, and suddenly I had to learn to live for myself. It was hard to accept that my house was empty, that there were no longer footsteps or voices feigning affection. But over time, I understood that silence wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. I started writing in a new notebook, with blue covers, not to remember the past, but to give thanks. I noted down small things, the smell of hot bread, the sound of the sea at dawn, the calm of not having to lie, and a phrase I repeated every morning. I survived the fire, and I learned to love the embers. One day, while watering the flowers, a young man from the town approached. It was Caleb, the son of a fisherman who lived nearby. "Are you Mrs. Robinson?" he asked shyly. "Yes," I replied. "My father told me your story. He said you defeated the fire." I smiled. "I didn't defeat it, Caleb. I just learned not to fear it." Since then, the boy began to visit me often. He helped me with groceries, fixed things around the house, and stayed to chat in the afternoons. He was noble, curious, full of life. Sometimes he reminded me of David when he was little, before greed stole his innocence. One afternoon, I told him part of my story. Not all, because there are wounds that shouldn't be opened twice. He listened in silence, and at the end, he said something that marked me. "My father always says that people who survive fire never burn again. They just shine differently." I looked him in the eyes, and I knew he was right. Little by little, I began to redecorate my new life. I hung the curtains I had saved from the fire, restored an old chair I found at the market, and planted white roses in the garden. I called them the Daughters of Fire. Every time they bloomed, the air filled with perfume, as if life wanted to remind me that beauty is also born from ash. I started receiving visits from women in the town, many of them widows or older like me. They came to drink tea, to chat, to laugh. At first, they called me the Lady of Fire. With time, they called me Miss Martha, and without meaning to, I became a refuge for those who, like me, had lost something but still had the will to live. One December night, right on the eve of my birthday, I sat facing the sea. It was the same date Henry had appeared in my dreams that fateful year. The sky was clear, and the stars seemed closer than ever. I lit a candle next to me and closed my eyes. "Thank you, my love," I whispered, "for not letting me fall, for continuing to guide me." The wind blew soft, and the candle flame leaned without going out. The smell of tobacco appeared, sharp, enveloping, like a caress I already knew. I smiled. I didn't need to see him to know he was there. "I promise you I will keep living, Henry," I said, looking at the sky, not out of obligation, but out of love. At dawn, the sea was calm. The sun emerged from the horizon with a golden shine that seemed to set the water on fire without burning it. I stayed watching that image, understanding that this was the true fire Henry spoke of, the one that doesn't destroy, but transforms. the one that purifies the soul. I stood up, took a deep breath, and felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It was as if, finally, life was giving me back what fear had taken away. I went back to the house, and passing in front of the mirror, I noticed something that surprised me. My reflection was no longer that of a broken woman. It was that of someone who had survived, who had learned, who had forgiven. And in my eyes, I saw him, Henry, smiling from somewhere on the other side of time. That afternoon, I wrote the last page of my blue notebook. I didn't want it to be a sad ending, but a luminous farewell. I wrote, "The fire wanted to destroy me, but it didn't know that I was fire too. Henry saved me once, but then I had to save myself. And now, when the sun rises and the sea shines, I know we keep walking together, him in the sky and me on earth." I closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and sat by the window. The wind brought with it the aroma of roses, and for an instant I seemed to hear a distant voice, serene, warm. "I told you, Martha, the sunrise always comes after the fire." If this story touched your heart, leave me a comment telling me what city you're watching from and what lesson Martha's life left you with. Hit like and subscribe to the channel to keep sharing stories that remind us that love, faith, and strength never go out. Because even when the world burns, there is always a sunrise waiting for us. In the end, we learn that dignity is the one thing the flames cannot touch. We set boundaries not to keep people out, but to keep our own peace in. And as for karma, it doesn't need our help. It just needs our silence and the patience to wait for the dawn.